I want to bring in our Monday morning political power panel, MSNBC contributor Joy-Ann Reid, also managing editor of The Griot, MSNBC contributor Matt Miller, also a columnist for The Washington Post, and then Ambassador Dennis Ross, NBC and MSNBC Mideast diplomacy analyst and former special assistant to President Obama. It's great to have you all three here. Joy-Ann, I want to start with you because the race is now very interesting, all tied up among the likely voters out there, 47 to 47. This is not good news if you are the incumbent. It is good news if you are Mitt Romney.
Well, you know, I think what you've seen over the last few weeks is a consolidation for Romney among his base. A lot of the movement, if you look within the polls, are Republicans and Republican leaners coming home to Romney. You've seen particularly in our poll, in the NBC Wall Street Journal poll, Barack Obama's numbers have been fairly stable, and especially if you look at registered voters. But what I think that does mean is that a lot of the media momentum is with Mitt Romney. He's getting more of the positive headlines and more of the sort of momentum describing headlines. So going into tonight, his challenge is to go in and not overlearn once again the lessons of that first debate and be so aggressive that he sort of goes on autopilot the way he did in the second debate, especially when we're on foreign policy, where the big elephant in the room, so to speak, is the fact that he's got so many of George W. Bush's advisors on his team, and they are quite bellicose on issues like the ones you were just talking about with Sean Spicer, on whether we should be taking military action in the Middle East. So he's got to really calibrate how he's going to sort of attack that issue.
That's the last thing people want, especially on the right, is to align Romney with Bush and remind people that Mitt Romney is being advised by a lot of the people that advised
General
George
Tommy
W.
Franks,
Bush.
a lot of other people, John Bolton. He's got a lot of the Bush team.
So Matt Romney is this novice on foreign policy. As Joy-Ann points out, though, he has aligned himself with people that were advisors to Bush 43. He made headlines for what David Axelrod called a Dukes of Hazzard international tour. We remember when he went throughout Europe over the summer and brought up his Olympics experience, what he was able to do in Salt Lake to kind of take the knees out of the gang in London because of the planning that had gone into theirs. But is this more of a situation where do no harm benefits Mitt Romney tonight? Like, not coming out and taking the bait of the president to show any aggravation, because when you're the president, there's a different view of foreign policy from the Oval Office. Mitt Romney clearly does not have that.
You're right, but I do think that do no harm won't be enough for Mitt Romney. I think it's wrong to view this as a kind of debate in any sense we would understand what a normal debate is. It's a televised opportunity for Mitt Romney to exaggerate differences on some key issues that I think very cynically and pragmatically they're going to try and figure out how to move voters in Ohio his way through what happens in those 90 minutes tonight. I would expect that for that reason he's going to try and tie the foreign policy discussion to economics and jobs. I think that pushes him toward China, where he's been more aggressive than the president in what his kind of aggression is about the Chinese currency manipulation, the trade subsidies, the theft of intellectual property. The question is, because the Obama folks have him boxed in, as soon as he hits the China button, they hit Bain Capital, pioneer of outsourcing, right, the whole values issue that they're running ads in Ohio saying he's not one of us. So that may trump what otherwise would be a vulnerability I think the president would have on the China trade relationship.
You bring up China, though, in the syllabus, as we've seen it, it comes in last. So we'll see how quickly they can push that button to get to the conversation.
I think he'll try and do that quickly.
He'll try and do it more quickly. Okay. Ambassador Ross, two big international stories in the headlines over the weekend. Still, the Libya story and the facts coming out of that persist, and also the report about these talks with Iran after the election. What foreign policy question do you want answered above all others tonight? What are you hoping to hear?
Well, I do think the biggest question is going to be, given the transformation in the Middle East, what's the right position for the United States, what's the posture, and what are the kind of responses we ought to be taking? I mean, one thing to keep in mind is not every country is the same, and you may have to do something different in light of it. Obviously, Syria is where we have an all-out conflict going on right now, so the question is, given the potential for conflict in Syria to radiate out into the region, should we be doing something more, and if so, what should it look like? The issue of Iran has been there for the last 4 years. It's actually been there for the last 3 administrations. Are we on the right track right now? Can we change Iran's behavior? I don't take these stories that seriously right now about an agreement on talks, but by the same token, both sides emphasize that our objective is prevention of Iran with nuclear capabilities, meaning they cannot have it, not containment, meaning we'll live with it and contain it after the fact. If that's the case, What more do we need to do from a diplomatic standpoint to try to achieve that? And if diplomacy fails, is force really on the table?
You make such a good point, though, about the fact that the theme for many of these countries, especially when we talk about the Arab Spring, is democracy, but the path there is very muddled. Joyanna, as you brought up off the top of the hour, the new NBC News Wall Street Journal poll showing Governor Romney, interestingly, though, narrowing the gap when it comes to women. Why do you think that he's been able to lock up what has been a very vulnerable spot for him over the last several months?
Yeah, I think that there is still a gender gap, but the gender gap is very demarcated when it comes to race and when it comes to age and when it comes to marital status. You know, married white women, particularly over 50, lean Republican anyway. So once again, you're seeing Mitt Romney consolidating what are constituencies that lean Republican, which is married, particularly suburban white women. But when you look at women and demarcated among ethnic lines, Latino women, African American women, and younger women, that gap is wider really than it's ever been. And if you look at the Pew poll, they're showing that we're going to probably have a wider gender gap now than we've had probably in a generation. And a lot of that has to do with the age of the respondents.
Real quickly, I want to show Quinnipiac, though, the poll that they have out of female voters in Ohio showing the president with a double-digit lead among women, leading overall there by 5 points. Matt, do you think it's just going to boil down to Ohio?
It looks like it may boil down to Ohio. I'm still worried. Maybe I'm a kind of worrywart that we're headed toward a scenario where there's a popular vote and electoral college vote potential difference, which I think would be a kind of disaster for the country. If we had to go through something like that again with the kind of all the implications of a banana republic that it would imply, I think it would be awful. I hope it won't be that way, but I have a little bit of fear.
Ambassador Ross, when we talk about the president coming in tonight with a different purview, obviously from the Oval Office, of what foreign policy, what it means for America to be a world leader and cast that leadership vision, calling other countries to rise up. Do you think that he walks a fine line of being able to lay out that agenda and do so in a way that Americans want to resonate with that? Because in our polling, it's showing that on certain factors, Americans want to see a second term go in a different direction.
You know, I do think, on the one hand, when you're president, you have a responsibility because the world is listening to you and everyone who you're dealing with is listening to you. So you're trying to strike out a posture that in a sense addresses those needs and be responsible. On the other hand, you want to say things that resonate with the American public. I think the president has basically adopted a position that says we're going to shape our foreign policy that takes account of our resources. We're going to be active in the world. We still remain the indispensable nation, but we can't solve every problem everywhere. I think Governor Romney faces a challenge of, on the one hand, trying to demonstrate that he's responsible, but he's going to reassert greater American leadership, because I think there's always a desire in the American public for us to be seen as a leader. There's always a question, though, do we want to pay the price of leadership?
Our political power panel for this Monday, the morning of the final presidential debate. Ambassador Dennis Ross, thank you. Matt Miller, Joyanne Reed, thanks to both of you. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Tom.